will be completely ignored.
Doing wrong. Parents pissed off every time I write a song. Smoke, crack, worship Satan, what the fuck is that? It's something funny, made for you to laugh at.
You're destroying America with your rap.
You're so full of shit, I need to call hazmat. The only way I would ever apologize
I gotta go
if
on
I had
record
my
with
face
this,
buried
I
in your
really
sister's
do.
thighs.
Never in 39 years have I ever seen anything like this.
Okay, I'm sorry
It
for what
shows
it's worth,
the
but the best
fanaticism
part of you was the
of this
afterbirth.
fan base.
If you can't take a fucking joke, then go jump in the river. Na 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 na, and I fucked your sister. If you can't take a fucking joke, then go jump in the river. La 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 la, and I fucked your sister.
If you want to continue to put this narrative out there that Cody finishing the story
What the fuck, dude?
is this big daunting task, and Cody has all these mountains to climb and all these brass rings to climb.
And of course, we gotta thank our official music sponsor, Psych Ward, for the continued use of Funny Bone.
My balls on her chin, she's bobbing her head to this fucking beat.
Damn, dog, man, your sister's a freak. Hey, baby, you like the Eagles? Want to hear something?
All right. Been a while. Most definitely been a while since I have been with you guys here in the asylum, doing what we do, doing what I love to do. There's been a lot going on behind the scenes here at the asylum recently, which is part of the reason why I have not been around doing stuff. But we are back. And this is always one of my favorite shows to do throughout the year. The All Hallows Eve Spooktacular is by far one of the best shows you will see me do, hands down, okay? I pride myself on that. And I always have, and I always will. That this is by far one of the best shows I do every year. Slimer got moved. Hang on. There we go. Now the spud's in the shot. Okay. A little bit of housekeeping that we're going to do here. First off, I got to thank all my great partners and sponsors here. So we are, of course, partnered with Keze Productions. Jess and Lisa are doing a great job running Keze Productions. We are going gangbusters. Every month, the Women's Health Summit just grows and grows and grows and grows and all of that. Keze Radio, our new partner. I want to say hello to everybody listening to the show over on Keze Radio. Hi, welcome to the asylum. We get a little crazy here, but we have fun. And then, of course, we have Growing Wings Adult Services. And if you guys checked out the Women's Health Summit, you know that Lisa was saying, I probably should have rethought that name, but is what it is. They do help adults with disabilities throughout the Northeast Ohio area. Lisa is always looking to grow the team over there at Growing Wings. So if you or anybody you know has always had a passion for wanting to work with adults with disabilities, give Lisa a ring-a-ding-ding, and she will get you guys going with that. Our musical partner, Psych Ward, just this past Saturday night, did a tribute show to both fallen members of Psych Ward, actually. Mr. Sick, Randy Thigpen, who we lost earlier this year on Valentine's Day. Yesterday was actually Randy's birthday, so happy heavenly one there, brother. We definitely all miss you down here. I unfortunately had to miss the show. Not by any of my own personal doing, and I'm very upset. As I'm sure you might be starting to tell that I missed that show. Psych Ward, Randy, was always a huge part of this show. Randy and I were always talking about, doing a music video for the opening of the show that they were going to write and do a personalized theme for. And we were kind of starting to get the wheels turning on that. Randy was actually going to start doing a segment here on the show as well. But obviously God had other plans. And of course, our production partner, Nameless Faceless Productions, we're actually working on something really cool over at Nameless Faceless Productions. Can't talk about it. It is kind of like a personal project, but we are working on something pretty cool over at Nameless Faceless Productions, and I can't wait for the people that it's for to see it. But this is the All Hallows Eve Spooktacular. This is night number 1. We're going 2 nights on this bitch this year, man. I've never done anything like that before. Like, let me just be honest. I've never done a 2-night Halloween Spooktacular before. I've done like multiple weeks of shows that were the Halloween Spooktaculars. But I've never done a 2-night back-to-back, kind of like a WrestleMania, or now like what they're going to be doing with SummerSlam and what they're going to be doing with the Royal Rumble. But I wanted to do this in 2 parts because this story has 2 parts to tell. And like I said, this is the first time I've ever done a true crime event as a Halloween Spooktacular. Normally I try to keep it within the realm of like the paranormal and things like that. But this story has been getting so red hot recently with the new documentaries that have been coming out at Netflix, with the Monsters TV show that has come out at Netflix. And now, I think because of all the hype that Netflix has because of the Menendez brothers, you're seeing documentaries like Menendez and Menudo coming back on Peacock, and even the Law & Order True Crime that they tried and failed, where they only did the 1 show, and that was the Menendez brothers. That is now back available to stream on Peacock as well. And then I'm sure, Paramount Plus is going to find something Menendez to throw up. I'm sure Hulu, any of those other streaming services out there, they're all going to find something Menendez to throw out there at you now because of all the hype that Netflix and Peacock are getting, thanks to Eric and Lyle, the Menendez brothers. So part 1, tonight's show, is basically just going to be discussing the actual case itself. Like, a little bit of the backstory on Eric and Lyle, and then what led into the actual murders, the trials, and yes, I said trials, plural. And then that'll be where we stop for tonight. If it takes the whole hour and a half, it takes the whole hour and a half. If it doesn't take the whole hour and a half, it doesn't take the whole hour and a half. We'll go as long as it needs to be. And then tomorrow night, what we're going to do is we're going to look at the updates that have happened very recently in the case. So as part of the trials, we also have the appeals that the brothers have filed over the years. And then tomorrow night, we're going to look at the case bit by bit, what the evidence shows, what the testimony during the trial showed, and then also kind of how society was back then versus how society is today, and why a lot of the things that may be happening in the case today may be happening and couldn't have happened back then. So that's kind of what this 2-night show is going to be. Like I said, welcome to the audience from Keze Radio, because we are simulcasting on Keze Radio for the very first time ever. So welcome to everybody watching over there, or listening over there, I should say. You can't watch on radio as well. So let's kick this off here. Who are the Menendez brothers? Joseph Lyle and Eric Galen Menendez are American brothers who killed their parents, Jose and Kitty, in their Beverly Hills home in 1989. At first, they claimed to not have been home, and that unknown intruders, possibly mob-affiliated, could have been involved. Eventually, the brothers admit to the slaying. However, what followed is by far one of the most bizarre crimes in American crime history. So we'll get into all of that here. So before the murders, Jose and Kitty were married in 1963 after Jose came to the States in the height of the Cuban Revolution at the age of 16. They moved to New York, where Jose earned a degree in accounting from Queens College. Lyle was born on January 10th, 1968. Kitty then quit her teaching job afterwards to care for Lyle, and the family moved to New Jersey, where Eric was born on November 27th, 1970. Both brothers attended Princeton Day School. Jose then received an executive position at the Hertz Corporation, where he is the one responsible for O.J. Simpson being the spokesperson for Hertz during all that time. That will come into play a little bit later on. And later RCA Records. With a new position, the family moved to Calabasas, California, after Jose was appointed the CEO of Live Entertainment, the home video distribution company. This is where things started going awry for the brothers. In 1988, Lyle and Eric, I should say, were convicted of committing multiple burglaries in the area. Now, Lyle wasn't necessarily convicted, but Lyle was the one responsible for the murders. And Eric ended up taking the fall for Lyle because Lyle was trying to get into Princeton University. Totaling over $100,000 in stolen cash and jewelry. And instead of prison, Jose convinced the courts to allow the boys to go to counseling. And Jose kind of had some weird demands. Jose wanted either recordings or some kind of like records of everything that the boys talked about, especially when it came to negative things involving the Menendez family relayed back to him in some way, either audio tape recordings or like transcribed notes, something like that from Dr. Oziel. Lyle went on to attend Princeton University, where he ended up on academic probation for poor grades, and then later was suspended for plagiarism. He also threw his roommate's belongings out because he didn't want to have a roommate. He left sinks overflowing, causing damages, and even violated university rules by repainting the walls in his dorm room. While attending high school, Eric wrote a screenplay with a friend entitled Friends, and no, this isn't like the famous television show. It was a story about a wealthy young man who killed his parents in the perfect crime for inheritance money. So that's kind of like a little bit of a lead up into the actual murders themselves. On August 18th, 1989, Lyle and Eric go to several gun stores to buy handguns. But due to issues with Lyle's driver's license and state-mandated 2-week waiting periods, they decided on shotguns instead because they could take them right out of the store. Whereas with a handgun, you have to wait 2 weeks. That is actually shown in Terminator and several other movies that take place in California where they're trying to get handguns and they say, well, you got to wait 2 weeks for those. And then obviously, in Terminator, he blows the guy away, but they acquire the guns along with bird and buckshot, and Eric uses Lyle's friend Donovan Goodrow's stolen ID to purchase all of this. So none of the guns are in the Menendez's names. Keep that in mind. Okay? Keep that in mind. And then on August 20th, 1989, while Jose and Kitty were watching television in the den, Eric and Lyle entered carrying the loaded shotguns. Jose was shot 6 times, including a fatal shot to the back of his head. Kitty was shot 10 times in total before the fatal shot to her cheek, and she was on the ground crawling away. Lyle ran to the car, Eric handed him more ammunition, and Lyle went back in to fire the fatal blow to his mother. Their initial alibi that was that after the killing, Eric and Lyle remained in the home for a few minutes, expecting the police to quickly due to the noise from the shotguns. When that didn't happen, they left to dispose of their blood-stained clothes and then later buried the shotguns on Mulholland Drive. They went to a local movie theater trying to get tickets to an earlier screening of the movie Batman, but theater policy did not allow for tickets to be purchased once the film already started. They then decided to go to the Taste of LA Festival in Santa Monica Civic Auditorium, and then after returning home and finding no police presence, Lyle then called 911 and emotionally told the operators, "Someone killed my parents," stating that they had just returned home and discovered the bodies. Eric was also heard screaming and crying in the background, and you can also hear Lyle trying to get Eric to calm down and settle down and everything like that. A very subtle routine to try to convince the police that they have nothing to do with this, right? Police arrived to take Eric and Lyle, running to them screaming. Investigators did not initially test the brothers for gunshot residue, which would prove if they had recently fired any weapons. The brothers kept up the story of being elsewhere at the time of the killings. Lyle brought up the fact that he thought the slaying may have been related to his father's business and implied a mafia hit. Investigators described it as one of the most brutal crime scenes that they had ever seen, noting the blood and brain matter splattered about the room. Detective Don Stewart was quoted as saying, "I've seen a lot of homicides, but nothing quite that brutal. Blood, flesh, skulls. It would be hard to describe, especially Jose, as resembling a human that you would recognize." That's how bad it was. The autopsy reported one blast caused explosive decapitation with evisceration to the brain and deformity of the face to Jose. While the first rounds of shots struck Kitty in her chest, right arm, left hip, and left leg, with the contact shot causing multiple lacerations to the brain. In the investigation, the police did actually look into the potential mob hit. And a lot of that information actually came from talking to Jose's co-workers at Live Entertainment. Before Jose took over Live Entertainment, they were actually deeply rooted in the pornography industry. Back in that time, the pornography industry, shockingly that it doesn't still happen today, had a lot of mafia and mob connections. So it wasn't that far-fetched to believe that because Jose was trying to take Live Entertainment, move it away from pornography and into more, I don't want to say family-oriented, but more mainstream, we'll put it that way, mainstream revenue sources, like actually picking up on Hollywood films and being the home video distribution companies for those, or even putting out some of their own films instead of pornography. And it was actually said that Jose hated pornography and he wanted nothing to do with it. More on that in a minute. So with the fact that the original people that owned live entertainment were heavily involved in the pornography industry, it wouldn't be that far-fetched to think that the mob would actually have something to do with what happened, because they're losing a revenue stream now. The mob is. But so is live entertainment. But live entertainment is replacing that with other revenue streams that the mob is not going to see any money from. Makes sense? Okay? So that is definitely 100% why the mafia angle could have worked. Everybody that knew Jose knew that was a big concern, is that, you know, these mob people that used to be involved with live entertainment were very pissed off that they were now being taken out of live entertainment. In the months after the killings, the brothers went on a lavish spending spree. Clothes, luxury items, business ventures, travel. Eric was paying for tennis matches overseas. Anything you can think of, these boys were spending money on it. Lyle bought Chuck Spring Street Cafe, a wing spot, 3 Rolex watches, a Porsche Carrera. Eric hired a full-time tennis coach, competed in tournaments all around the world, like I just mentioned. And they left the Beverly Hills mansion empty, purchasing adjoining condos in Marina del Rey. Dined extravagantly, traveled to the Caribbean, London, collectively spending over $700,000. They also attended a New York Knicks game that later became immortalized when they appeared courtside in the background of a Mark Johnson trading card. So these guys were just living it up after mom and dad were murdered. The brothers' spending habits ended up becoming a point of contention. And also ended up making them pretty significant suspects in their parents' killing. To the point that Eric's high school friend Craig Cigarelli reported to the investigators that Eric confessed to him, revealing Eric's screenplay friends, and discussed the same scenario. In an attempt to get a confession, police convinced Craig to wear a wire during a lunch with Eric. When Eric asked him, Eric denied involvement. Police also heard from Lyle's friend Glenn Stevens that weeks after the murders, Lyle left Princeton to take care of something at home. Lyle told Craig that he heard from family members that there was a new copy of Jose's will and that cut them out of the will, and Lyle went home to erase it from Jose's computer. Not only did Lyle go home to erase it, he actually hired a professional IT company to come in and completely wipe that computer out. Eric would actually go on to confess to his psychiatrist, Jerome Oziel, who then told his mistress, Judalon Smith. Oziel started recording his sessions with Lyle and Eric, and after a nasty breakup with Smith, she went to the police and informed them of the recordings. Investigators convinced Oziel to turn over the recordings and used them to arrest Eric and Lyle. So I want to touch base on that slightly. This has been a very big point of contention throughout this entire case. Dr. Oziel. Oziel is not a good man. His license had been suspended, and even thrown out at one point for A, wrongful sexual relationships with patients, and B, his billing practices when it came to other former patients. Jose Menendez being one of them. So what happened with that is they discovered that he was improperly billing patients. And this actually came up because he goes to Jose and Kitty's funeral to offer condolences to Eric and Lyle, and then ends up charging Eric and Lyle $13,000 for going to the funeral and offering condolences, because he claimed at that point he was their therapist, which was not the case. Lyle was arrested on March 8th, 1980, outside of the mansion. Eric turned himself in 3 days later after returning from a tennis tournament in Israel. Both were held without bail and jailed separately, but they were in cells right next to each other. For the pretrials and legal disputes, in August of 1990, Judge James Albrecht ruled that the recorded conversations between the brothers and Dr. Oziel were admissible as evidence since Lyle threatened him and violated the doctor-patient privilege at that point. So I don't necessarily agree that Lyle threatened Dr. Oziel. Basically, what happened was Eric calls Lyle and tells Lyle that he's talking to Dr. Oziel because he needed someone to talk to because the guilt was overwhelming him. He's having nightmares, blah, blah, yada, yada. So he tells Dr. Oziel, yes, Lyle and I killed our parents. But he never said why. So then Lyle shows up basically to tell Eric to shut the fuck up. By this point, Oziel had already called Judalon Smith and says, you're not going to believe what just happened. The Menendez brothers came in here and admitted that they killed their parents. Which it wasn't really the Menendez brothers, it was Eric. So then Judalon shows up to the office and is sitting in the lobby. Judalon would claim that she could hear everything that was going on in Oziel's office. The only issue with that is that there is not one, but two padded soundproof doors between Oziel's office and where Judalon was in the lobby. So then that would mean that the only way that Judalon Smith knew any information that was coming out of the Menendez boys' mouths was A, she was listening, or B, Oziel would tell her later on, or she may have even heard the tapes. I mean, you got to remember, she is this man's mistress. She claims that she was brainwashed with him and that he could get her to do anything with just the sound of the utterance of a certain word. Obviously, that's never been able to be proven, but this chick was a few fries short of a Happy Meal, if you get my drift. So the reason why they claim that doctor-patient confidentiality and doctor-patient privilege was violated is because Lyle threatened Dr. Oziel as the boys were leaving after that initial session. According to Lyle and according to Dr. Oziel, their stories do not change. Lyle shook Dr. Oziel's hand and, was firm about it, which, you've always been told. If you're a male and you're doing a professional handshake, you have to be firm. You have to put some pressure on that bitch, right? And said, "Good luck, Dr. Oziel." Dr. Oziel took that as a threat. And then the judge, when they were speaking to Judalon Smith claims that Oziel actually came and stayed with her because he feared that the Menendez brothers were following him home and he didn't want them to find his wife and children, so he went and stayed with his girlfriend for a few days. I don't know about you, but that doesn't sound like a violation of doctor-patient privilege to me. But we'll get to that tomorrow night. We'll talk about all of that stuff tomorrow night. I just wanted to put a little bit of emphasis on why the judge agreed to remove the doctor-patient privilege from that. Eric and Lyle's attorneys both appeal that decision, taking it all the way to the Supreme Court, which ended up delaying the case for 2 years plus. And the Supreme Court did rule that all recordings, except for one recording where Eric described the actual killings, were admissible as evidence in the case, because that is the only time where it is Eric and Dr. Oziel only. And Eric was actually Oziel's patient. Lyle technically was not. So the Supreme Court ruled that they were keeping the ruling intact due to the nature of conversations. Doctor-patient privilege was not violated. After the ruling, L.A. County grand jury issued the indictments in December of 1992, charging both brothers with capital murder with special circumstances. However, with no evidence supporting the financial gain was the motive for the killings, that special circumstance was removed, and a special circumstance was then added in the case of lying in wait after the murders. Maximum sentence of death, and made them eligible for the death penalty, and no possibility of parole. Now, these trials ended up becoming a media firestorm. These were one of the first cases that were ever featured on court TV, making it possible for the O.J. Simpson trial to then be a massive staying force on court TV as well. The boys originally had hired Robert Shapiro. Everybody that knows the O.J. Simpson case will know the name of Robert Shapiro. Shapiro kind of realized that the boys were not necessarily the kind of clients that he would like to take on. There was nothing for him to gain from this case, so he redacted himself from the case. In that case, the boys were then led by defense lawyer Leslie Abramson, and she was also Eric's personal attorney, and then Jill Lansing was Lyle's attorney. And the brothers stated that they killed their parents out of fear for their lives after a lifetime of abuse at the hands of their parents, especially sexual abuse at the hands of their father, who was described as a cruel perfectionist and pedophile. Meanwhile, their mother was described as an enabling, selfish, mentally unstable alcoholic and drug addict, although that claim about being a drug addict was never verified, who encouraged her husband's behavior and was also violent towards the brothers. Lyle alleged that his father began abusing him at the age of 6, but stopped when he was 8 without explanation. Eric alleged that he was abused up until adulthood. Shortly prior to the murders is when it stopped. Eric testified that 2 weeks before the killings, he first told Lyle about the abuse he was experiencing, leading to multiple confrontations within the family. Both brothers testified that their father had threatened to kill them if they did not keep the abuse secret. As a result, they purchased the shotguns for protection and self-defense, and they alleged that the final confrontation occurred in their home's den on August 20th, 1989, shortly before Kitty and Jose were killed. According to their testimony, Jose closed the den door, which they described as unusual. They testified that they were afraid that they would be killed by their parents, so went outside to load the shotguns, Eric recalled. And as I went into the room, I just started firing. Under California law, the brothers could only be acquitted for manslaughter if they could prove they were in imminent danger. So let's break up a little bit of this piece by piece. The abuse allegations never came out in any conversation that the police had with either brother. There were some conversations with some family members prior to this being the crux of the defense that Jose was an asshole. There's no other way to put it. There were stories that Jose's sister, the boy's aunt, would tell where at one time they were at dinner. Or actually, they were just eating a family dinner around the table. And Eric was separating his food. And didn't really want to eat his vegetables. So he was separating broccoli from green beans, I think is what it was. And Jose was looking at Eric, and he pretty much was just like, look at that. That's not a boy, that's a sissy. Sissies separate their food. Sissies don't eat all of the food on their plate. And he goes, so what are you, Eric? And I'm going to say a word here that I don't normally say because I don't agree with it. I'm just reciting what was said in a statement made. So what are you, Eric? A faggot. And then he would just go on and like grab Eric violently and, you know, go ahead, eat your food, and just kept calling him that word and things like that. And there were other stories of like that as well. Lyle started losing his hair in high school. And Jose saw that as a sign of weakness as well and told Eric that people are going to think that you're, you know, weak and you're, you know, a bunch of other things if you don't take care of that. And he was actually the one that physically purchased Eric's hairpiece, totaling of around, I want to say, $3,000-$4,000 to make it look like it was his natural hair, and things like that. And that actually became something that he was concerned about in prison because the prison guards kept taking the glue to put his hairpiece on away, and his attorney had to keep convincing the jail to let him keep it, so that his hair would stay coif, or coif, if you would. So the sexual abuse stuff never really came out. But during initial interviews with each brother, between their attorneys when they were in jail before the trial started, both of them did kind of talk about, you know, how domineering and demanding and things like that their father was, that he was a perfectionist. And if you were not perfect, you were not a Menendez. That is not who the Menendez family is. Menendezes are perfect. Menendezes don't rob from people. Menendezes don't go bald. Menendezes don't separate their food because it makes them look like they're queer. Things like that. That was what Jose's stance was. And judging by Jose's reaction when the boys were arrested for the burglaries, and the way that he reacted to that, and the way that he had Dr. Oziel basically violate doctor-patient privilege by sharing that information with Jose, you can kind of see that that is the kind of man that Jose is. A dominating, dick-headed fucking asshole. So their lawyers hired a psychiatrist to speak to both Eric and Lyle separately. Eric started just spilling all of this stuff that was happening with the sexual abuse from Jose and things like that. It took Lyle a little bit longer to admit to it because obviously there's still that fear and there's still that stigma, you know, that was going on. You know, what was this real? And then slowly, family members, cousins, people like that started coming out and saying that either at one point or another, Eric, Lyle, or both would ask questions or would sit there and say, like, do these things happen to you? Is this what a father does? Or is something going on with my family that isn't right. So then those family members would start becoming witnesses for the defense. And obviously anybody that would sit there and say that Jose and Kitty were the worst parents in the history of parents, obviously the defense wanted those as well. But though that was the narrative that the defense was putting out in this trial. And during the police's search of the home, to kind of add to this fear that Eric and Lyle had, that they thought that their parents might be plotting to kill them, the police found 2 shotguns in Jose's closet that had never been fired. And then when the family was looking for Jose's will, their cousin Henry found a tape recorder with microphones that were going into each boy's bedroom and a mountain of audio cassettes that were labeled Lyle and Eric. It was never revealed if Henry took that information to the police, and anything involving those audio tapes has never been seen or heard from again. But that also adds to Kitty possibly knowing everything that was going on and not doing anything to stop it. So what's the prosecution's take on all of this, right? What's the prosecution saying the reasons for Eric and Lyle murdering their parents? They argued that there was no evidence of imminent danger or self-defense. Prosecutor Pam Bozanich argued that this was contradicted by the brothers purchasing shotguns in advance. Prosecutors used the taped conversation between the brothers and their psychologist, in which the brothers said that they had planned the murders beforehand. The prosecution also argued that the murders were inconsistent with self-defense killing after they had shot their mother, Kitty, who was moaning and trying to get away. Lyle then went to reload his shotgun and returned to finish her off. The prosecution argued that the sexual abuse allegations were fabricated, as nobody mentioned abuse until 7 months after the murders, while a legal defense was being formulated. I do gotta say, that's a pretty good prosecutor right there. The prosecution told jurors that mention of sexual abuse was absent in discussions and tapes with their psychiatrist, Dr. Rosiel, and that Eric did not mention abuse in his earlier confession to his friend Craig Signorelli. The prosecution told jurors that throughout the trial, that Lyle and Eric were capable of lying frequently and in great deal to avoid being caught, and thus they were capable of lying about child abuse to avoid the death penalty. Prosecutor Pam Bozanich played Lyle's staged 911 call for the jurors with the intention of showing how good of an actor he was. I'm actually kind of shocked that they used Lyle as the actor, considering the fact that Eric himself, before focusing on tennis, was actually taking acting classes because he wanted to be an actor. And he actually shared a story with his attorney where he did a soliloquy from Shakespeare, kind of talking about his home life and how it felt like a prison, and everyone in his acting class cheering because of how well done it was. That has actually been something that I've been thinking about quite a bit. But we'll go over all of this in a little bit more detail tomorrow. This is kind of just the telling of the story and kind of just getting it out here and talking about everything that was said during the trials, and everything like that. I'm just putting a little bit of focus into some of the areas. But then we'll get into my thoughts and my breakdown of everything tomorrow on part 2 of the Halloween Spooktacular. So you don't want to miss that. Prior to the trial, Lyle offered his ex-girlfriend Jamie Pisurik money if she would lie for him in the trial and claim that Jose had made sexual advances towards her, which Pisurik reported to the police. Before Lyle was cross-examined by the prosecution, he preemptively admitted this under questioning by his own lawyer. Don't look good for Lyle with that. Lyle and Eric's cousin, Diane Vandermolen, testified that during a stay with the family in the mid-70s, Lyle confided in her that his father was abusing him. Vandermolen claimed that she told Kitty about the incident, but Kitty sided with her husband and accused Lyle of lying. Vandermolen recalled that after this, Kitty sent Lyle upstairs, and she never heard of the issue again. Under questioning from Pam Bazanich, Vandermolen said that she never witnessed any abuse, and Lyle testified that Vandermolen was the only person that he ever told of the abuse. Another cousin, Andy Cano, alleged that as a child, Eric told him about the abuse, which they described as genital massages. Prosecutors pressed Cano, asking him if he would lie for his cousin, which he denied. The defense presented 2 faceless photographs of baby boys from the waist down, which Lyle alleged were taken by their father when they were little. Prosecution argued that there was no evidence the photographs were taken by Jose, and the photos were found on a roll of film interspersed with photos from a children's birthday party. Evidence from a taped therapy session between the brothers and their psychologist, Jerome Oziel, was also presented after legal attempts were made by the defense to exclude it. The prosecution used the tapes to disprove the abuse claims, as the brothers made no mention of sexual abuse, instead complained about their dictatorial father and suicidal mother. Lyle also stated that by killing their mother, they may have been doing her and them a favor by putting her out of her misery, and that they had shown great courage by killing their mother. And according to Oziel's account, they didn't kill their parents for money, but rather out of hatred and out of a desire to be free from their father's domination, messages of inadequacy, and impossible standards. Oziel stated that Lyle had confided that he knew his father would have been proud of him for killing him and actually pulling the task off. The defense consultant, Ann Burgess, argued Oziel was manipulative and controlling, arguing that he directed many of the statements made by the brothers in the tape recordings. Now, as somebody who has done forced confessions in the past, talked about forced confessions. I haven't actually made any forced confessions. But as discussed, forced confessions in the past. Lyle is of genius level intelligence. Eric isn't that far off. To think... Well, actually, you know what? Let me kind of rephrase that a little bit, because okay. At any given time, any human being on the planet, regardless of intelligence level, regardless of anything like that, could, without even knowing it, and especially somebody like a psychiatrist or a psychologist, could actually be really good at this. To manipulate you into saying things a certain way. To make you think that that person is actually helping you. Or to make you think that that person is on your side. And in this case, some of the things that Oziel said to these boys, and he admitted this on the stand. He would say things like, I'm the only one that's going to be on the that was on their side. I wanted to actually hear the story. I'm a doctor. This is what I do. And I did hear snippets of the tapes because the entire testimony from this case is ridiculous. In length, I mean. But there are times where it does kind of seem like he's leading them towards a certain thing. Like he very much kind of like what the investigators were doing to Jesse Miss Kelly in the West Memphis 3 case. You can hear moments where he's just like, okay, so, you know, I can kind of understand why you murdered your father. He was very demanding and da-da-da-da-da. I know that because of my dealings with him. But why your mother? Why kill your mother? Was it, you know, because that she always took your dad's side when he would say things? Well, you know, always saying things to the family like, oh, that's just Jose. Don't worry about it. The boys will be fine. Or was there something more to it? And, you know, or was it more because of her suicidal tendencies? You were kind of just putting her out of her misery. And then you would hear the boys go, yeah, that's it. You know, so there was some manipulation there, but enough to sit there and say like he was pushing them towards a specific agenda, I'm not sure. Do I think that Oziel definitely had ulterior motives than actually helping the boys? Most definitely. I think this dude was actually trying to sell some books. That's what I think. And I think he was going to take his mistress with him until the you know, the crazy woman that she was turned her back on. Where was I? Okay. Oziel's ex-mistress, Judalon Smith, also testified that Oziel wanted to control the brothers by taping their sessions. That I do agree with. Smith's testimony was also challenged by the prosecution, noting she was the one who notified the authorities of the confession tapes, but had now joined the defense to discredit Oziel after a tumultuous breakup. So there is that part of it too. She's playing both sides of the fence. Eric did testify that he put cinnamon in his father's tea and coffee to make his semen taste better. The plausibility of that claim was disputed because cinnamon is a detectable flavor. Prosecutor Leslie Kuriyama proposed that Jose had not forced Eric into sex acts, but was furious that his son was potentially homosexual and that this may have caused tension within the family. Judge Weisberg refused to allow Kuriyama to discuss the idea. The defense argued that Kuriyama's idea was disgusting, while Kuriyama argued it was relevant because one witness claimed to have seen gay porn magazines in the house, implying this meant Jose liked men. However, the meaning would change if they belonged to Eric. Eric alleged his mother made it seem like it was worse than death to be gay. And I didn't think I was. I don't know. And followed up by saying he liked girls and enjoyed his relationship with his girlfriend. The prosecution wanted to allow the jury to see a screenplay that Lyle had written with his friend Craig in high school. I think that actually should have been Eric instead of Lyle. I think that was a mistyping there. About a wealthy young man who killed his parents for the inheritance money. Judge Weisberg ruled against it, saying the play was written too long before the shootings to have relevance. The defense also won a ruling against the use of the word sociopath in front of juries. Oziel told the court that he had described to the boys the difference of a crime of passion and crime of assault, and that in that response they described themselves as sociopaths. The judge said the label was too prejudicial to announce in front of a jury. A defense witness, psychologist Ann Tyler, described Eric's burglaries of more than $100,000 in cash and jewelry as acting out behavior of an adolescent. Both verdicts for the brothers were divided by gender. Female jurors suggested voluntary manslaughter, while male jurors pushed for first-degree murder. And after a month of deliberations, the trial ended on a mistrial due to 2 deadlocked juries. As a result, Los Angeles County District Attorney Gil Garcetti immediately announced that the brothers would be retried. So let's talk about something that happened in between trial number 1 and trial number 2. The trial of the century happened, which is kind of funny because they were actually calling the Menendez brothers trial the trial of the century. But then you have somebody that the Menendez brothers actually know personally and met when they were children because their father got him his deal in making commercials for Hertz, killed his wife, and an innocent bystander by the name of Ron Goldman. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, in between trial number 1 for the Menendez brothers and trial number 2 for the Menendez brothers, O.J. Simpson happened. The first trial, after the 2-year delay, started in 1993 to 1994. So we all know that, yes, that is the timeline of the O.J. and Nicole situation, where O.J. potentially killed his wife, although he was acquitted of it criminally, but then found guilty of it civilly. This isn't talking about O.J., this is talking about the Menendez brothers, but I want to bring this up. During the brothers' time in jail, before the trial got started, Lyle got caught sending a letter to his brother where in detail he described an escape attempt to get them out of jail. So then they were then separated. Where their cells used to be right next to each other, now they were on 2 different ends of the prison. Separating the boys because the prison was afraid that they were manipulating each other and that they had this crazy twin magic kind of thing going on. And that's kind of evident throughout a lot of different parts of this trial. So after O.J. is arrested, and obviously he's being held under special circumstances as well, so no bail for O.J. So O.J. goes directly to jail. Who does O.J. get placed next to in jail? Drum roll, ladies and gentlemen. Eric motherfucking Hernandez. Or Menendez, I should say. Not Hernandez. Menendez. So Eric and O.J. are sharing some conversations and things like that while O.J. is waiting to go to trial as well. The mistrial happens in the boys' case. Garcetti announces that he is going to immediately retry the boys. And then they have to put all of that on pause to deal with the clusterfuck that was the O.J. Simpson trial. Which was also, ladies and gentlemen, for the final answer, ding! Aired completely on Court TV. We all know about the media fiasco that the O.J. trial was. And because that O.J. trial went so bad, and then you, in between all of that, you also have, so because of that fiasco that was the O.J. Simpson trial, Jill Garcetti decided that he wasn't going to let that happen. And there have been a lot of famous interviews, not necessarily with Gil Garcetti himself, but with other people involved in the Menendez trial, especially the defense attorneys, where they flat out said, we didn't get O.J., we're going to get the Menendez brothers. And you also have to think about everything else that was happening around L.A. County at that time as well. Not only was it O.J., there was also the Rodney King fiasco. There was the riots fiasco. So everybody's thinking on L.A. was not good during that time. And that is, I think, what caused this major shift that we see happen between trial number 1 and trial number 2. There's a lot of things that in trial number 1 I felt violated some ethics things when it came to some of the things that we heard that were happening in the trial. But I think a lot of that also happened in the second trial as well. But Eric was actually in communication with OJ, you know, at night when they would come back from the court while OJ was waiting for his trial and everything like that. And then obviously OJ got moved to another unit because of Shapiro and all the bullshit that Shapiro was pulling during this trial. So, you know, after they moved Lyle, OJ was kind of the only person that Eric had to speak to when he was in jail. But now OJ's gone too. OJ's in a private cell thanks to Shapiro. And it even like started coming out after OJ's trial concluded, you know, if it doesn't fit, you must acquit and all that stuff. The Menendez brothers even asked if they would be able to get Johnny Cochran as a lawyer to get them off the way he got OJ off. And I'm sitting there and I'm thinking to myself, like, I don't think you're the kind of client that Johnny Cochran would take on. But who knows? They were rich. They obviously had the money to pay somebody like Johnny Cochran. They had the money to pay somebody like Robert Shapiro. They had the money to pay for just about any lawyer they wanted. According to the family, just in estates alone, without a will, the Menendez brothers had $14 million that they can play with. $14 million. That buys a lot of defense, ladies and gentlemen. It just ask Mr. Simpson. So OJ's trial goes on. Big fiasco, you know, media coverage everywhere because it's the juice, right? It's OJ. And this is right off the heels of the first Menendez trial. We all know what happened with OJ. So Gil Garcetti comes out and he says, no media coverage at all in the courtroom. We're not having that bullshit fiasco again like we had with the first trial and then also with OJ's trial. So this, mainly in part because Judge Weisberg did not allow cameras in the courtroom because it would increase the risk that the jurors would be exposed to information and commentary about the case outside of the courtroom. Well, if that was such a concern, why didn't you do anything about it in the first case? Because obviously the jury, and this was something that the defense was very worried about in the first trial, was that because this case just had an overabundance of media coverage before the trial even started. People that were supposed to be witnesses doing interviews with Diane Sawyer. People that were supposed to be witnesses writing books. People that were supposed to be witnesses doing interviews with this person, that person. Information that was supposed to be evidence in the trial being leaked to ABC News, being leaked to NBC, being leaked here, leaked there. Hell, and to quote Leslie Abramson, she was worried that the jury pool was going to be insanely poisonous. And I definitely think that that was a huge part of why those boys got the mistrial that they got. But then something else happened. Eric testified over, and this is the second trial now that we're in. Eric testified over 15 days about the allegations of abuse. Judge Weisberg limited some of that testimony about some of the allegations of abuse on the third day. Weisberg limited the defense to 64 total witnesses in the retrial. Eric alleged that Jose had told him that he was written out of the will. The prosecution this time around, instead of just going into that they killed their parents out of the disdain and things like that their parents had for them, but that they were going into like this billionaire boys club scenario to where it was all about the inheritance and that the boys had been written out of the will and they were trying to take the parents out before the will was rewritten. Lyle's former fiance, Jamie Pasaric, testified that Lyle had tried to bribe her to testify falsely in the first trial. Pasaric said that Lyle told her fictitious stories about the mob killing of his parents, which she originally believed. She testified that during a regular visit to see Lyle in prison, he offered her a large sum of money to claim that Jose had made sexual advances towards her. Lyle did not testify in the second trial. Khan told jurors that Lyle had asked his friend Brian Asamalinian to fabricate a story in the first trial. A 7-page letter was found by the police, allegedly written by Lyle, detailing how he wanted him to testify. The prosecution also had another letter that Lyle had allegedly written to his ex-girlfriend, Tressie Baker, from jail. It included instructions on how to testify with the sentence, "We will decide later around what date this incident occurred." The defense disputed its authenticity. Baker was not reached for comment. Prosecutor Khan challenged Eric's allegations that he was raped at the age of 18 when he had a vehicle and enough money to leave his parents' home. Khan asked him why he did not join the army. Eric said that he would not be safe from his father in the army because he was the most powerful man I've ever met. Eric said that there were no witnesses to his allegations of sexual abuse. Psychology professor John Wilson, an expert witness for the defense, testified that Eric had symptoms of PTSD, which supported the allegations of abuse. Prosecution expert witness psychiatrist Park Elliott Dietz, countered that there was no way to know if he had PTSD because the allegations were unproven. He argued Eric did not show symptoms of learned helplessness as he had purchased guns and practiced with them at a shooting range. Leslie Abramson argued that the brothers acted out of fear that their parents would harm them for threatening to reveal family secrets, and that the killings were a highly emotional overkill. So let me kind of just back that up a little bit, because there actually was testimony in the first trial from family members, including Jose's own sister, that this was the case, that Jose was doing everything he could to protect the family, and that definitely would include protecting so-called family secrets. So I do not find it that far-fetched that is something that could have potentially happened. Jose would have done anything to protect those family secrets. Judge Weisberg determined that there was insufficient evidence to support the claim that the brothers were in imminent danger when they murdered their parents. Weisberg did allow the defense to argue that the brothers shot Jose in the heat of passion, but not their mother. He concluded there was enough evidence to suggest that Jose might have provoked his sons into committing homicide, but not enough to indicate that Kitty did. Clara Wright, wife of the attorney hired by the brothers, testified that the brothers had brought a safe to her home in hopes of locating a copy of their parents' will. The safe was opened 2 days after the murder in the presence of Brian Anderson and Carlos Baralt, the brothers' uncles. It was found to be empty. Khan argued that this was evidence the brothers were trying to access their parents' money as quickly as possible. Both brothers were eventually convicted on 2 counts of first-degree murder, with special circumstances for lying in wait, as well as conspiracy to murder in the penalty phase of the trial. They were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Even before the boys were arrested, when this case was still being investigated, almost every family member for the Menendez family that the police spoke to had all said the same thing. We were all looking for the will. It wasn't just Eric and Lyle. It was everybody. Everybody was looking for the will. And mainly because they were trying to do what they felt was right for Eric and Lyle, which was make sure that they were going to be financially secure until they can get something together of their own. If the judge had not limited what the prosecution, or what the defense, I should say, was allowed to speak on, then maybe that fact would have come out. Is that it wasn't necessarily the fact that the boys themselves were looking for the will, but it was the whole family as a collective. And I would have thought that that might have been evident in the fact that their uncles were there with them when they were trying to open the safe. They were actively looking for this. And even the boy's aunt, Jose's brother or sister, testified to that to police. She said, we were all looking for the will. We were trying to find it because we wanted to know what Kitty and Jose were going to try to do with all that money that they had. If it wasn't going to the boys weren't going to get it. They were just going to get whatever the estate was, because that was what the family wanted to do for them. So that to me was kind of like, I think you might have just, and even the defense felt that the boys were kind of being railroaded in the second sentence, in the second trial. It was either going to be first degree murder or nothing. And they felt that they were very tied to a defense that they could give. And that actually I felt did kind of come out, especially with the Billionaire Boys Club idea, where the only reason that they killed their parents was for money. And that script that Eric wrote that was originally not allowed in the first trial was allowed in the second trial. So a lot of back and forth here on what, same judge, which is kind of weird in my opinion as well, that he would allow evidence in the second trial that he wouldn't allow in the first trial, and then disallow evidence and testimony in the second trial that he allowed in the first trial. So I think somebody was paying that judge off to get this second trial to go the way it was. Can't prove it, but more on that tomorrow when we discuss the case in depth. All right, so we're going to finish up here. They were ultimately sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. During the penalty phase, Abramson reportedly told defense witness William Vickery to edit his own notes of meeting with Eric to remove potentially damning information. But the district attorney's office decided not to launch a criminal investigation of Abramson. Both brothers also filed motions for a mistrial, claiming that they suffered irreversible damage in the penalty phase as a result of possible misconduct and ineffective representation by Abramson. On July 2nd, 1996, Weisberg sentenced the brothers to life in prison without parole, to be served as consecutive sentences for the killings and charges of conspiracy to commit murder. On April 4th, 2018, Lyle was moved into the same housing unit as Eric, reuniting them for the first time since they began serving their sentences nearly 22 years earlier. The brothers said that they burst into tears and hugged each other during the first meeting in the housing unit. The unit where they are housed is reserved for inmates who agree to participate in education and rehabilitation programs without creating disruptions. In 2018, Lyle founded the Prison Reform and Beautification Initiative, the Green Space Project, which aims to make prisons more livable and rehabilitative by painting murals on walls and planting trees. In June 2024, Lyle earned a bachelor's degree in sociology through the University of California, Irvine Special College Program for inmates of Richard J. Donovan Correctional Facility. So with that, what we're going to do, we're actually going to stop here, and then we will talk about the appeals process all the updates in the case, and my thoughts on the entire proceedings from beginning to end tomorrow night in part 2 of the 2024 Money's Crazy Mind All Hallows Eve Spooktacular. So until tomorrow night, here on Kaze Productions, here on Money's Crazy Mind and the Nameless Faceless Productions page, and all the folks listening over on Kaze Radio, until tomorrow night, remember, it can't rain all the time.
Money's Crazy Mind is proud to be the exclusive flagship broadcast of Nameless Faceless Productions.
That's all, folks.